Imagine a boy snatched from his mother's arms at just 7 years old, thrust into a brutal training ground where weakness meant humiliation and failure could mean death. Welcome to Ancient Sparta. No bedtime stories, no soft lullabies, only the relentless march of discipline, pain, and pride. Here, childhood wasn't a time of innocence. It was a crucible that forged warriors. From the moment a Spartan child took their first breath, their life was not their own. It belonged to the state. Newborns were examined by the elders for strength and health. A twisted limb, a weak cry, a slight deformity, and the child was abandoned to the chasm of Mount Taygetus. Those who survived were not coddled. They were hardened. Boys were raised not by doting mothers, but by a culture obsessed with warfare. At 7, they entered the agoge, the infamous Spartan military education system designed to strip them of softness and shape them into lethal weapons. Food was scarce by design. They were taught to steal, not for greed, but survival. Caught stealing? You were beaten, not for the theft, but for being careless enough to get caught. Discipline came not from lectures, but from lashes. Fear was not allowed to take root. Pain was a lesson, not a deterrent. Sleep was taken on beds of reeds plucked with their bare hands, and they marched barefoot even in winter. Their clothes were few, their comforts non-existent, but their pride was absolute. The strongest boys rose as leaders, while the weak were discarded or brutalized into compliance. They were taught to fight, to endure, to kill, but also to think. The agoge was not merely physical. It trained the mind, encouraging cunning, strategy, and absolute loyalty to Sparta. The boys learned through competition, wrestling, spear throwing, and mock battles that often left real injuries. Blood was part of the curriculum. But Spartan girls were no delicate flowers either. While boys trained for war, girls were trained to bear warriors. From childhood, they exercised in public, ran races, threw javelins, and even wrestled. Their bodies had to be strong, because Sparta believed only strong women could birth strong sons. They wore short tunics, shocking to the rest of Greece, and they spoke their minds freely, bold, and unashamed. In a world where most women were confined and silent, Spartan women walked with pride, spoke with confidence, and were feared almost as much as the men. They controlled property, inherited wealth, and managed the home while their husbands trained or fought. They raised their children with iron will and legendary phrases, "Come back with your shield or on it." Spartan mothers didn't weep for fallen sons. They wept for cowards. At 12, Spartan boys had endured years of hunger, cold, and violence. But worse still was yet to come. The Krypteia, a secret rite of passage, turned adolescents into predators. Armed only with daggers and cloaked in darkness, they were sent into the countryside with a mission to terrorize and sometimes kill the helots, Sparta's enslaved class. It was more than training. It was psychological warfare, a lesson in domination and fear. The helots, who outnumbered Spartans by the thousands, were kept in check by this state-sanctioned reign of terror. And the boys? They returned dead-eyed and colder than before. If they survived, if they succeeded, if they proved they were Spartans. By age 20, the boy became a man, now eligible to join a Syssitia, a mess hall of warriors where bonds were forged tighter than blood. Eating together, training together, fighting together, Spartans believed in unity above all. Marriage was allowed, but not domestic life. Husbands lived in barracks until age 30. Wives would sneak away in the night to be with them, and children were raised communally, not in cozy homes, but in a system that bred excellence through shared hardship. Loyalty to Sparta was absolute, greater even than love. And should a man falter, cowardice, desertion, failure, he was branded with shame, literally, outcast, humiliated. His peers refused to speak to him. Women turned their backs. He might be alive, but his life was over. Spartan warriors were feared across the ancient world. They wore crimson cloaks, a symbol of blood and valor, and plumed helmets that struck terror into their enemies. Their hoplite formation, the unbreakable phalanx, was a wall of bronze and resolve. They didn't fight for glory, wealth, or conquest. They fought because they were Sparta. Their lives were one long preparation for one perfect moment on the battlefield. And if death came, it was welcomed. They were taught that the highest honor was to die for Sparta. Their tombstones bore no flowery eulogies, only the name and the words, "He died in battle." Their bones were buried where they fell, their spirits immortalized in song and memory. Yet Sparta wasn't just blood and steel. It was paradoxical, a society that revered simplicity, yet built its power through systematic control. They discouraged luxury, banned gold and silver currency, and ate a revolting black broth made from pig's blood and vinegar. But they were rich in discipline, in courage, in unity. Their laws were passed down not by paper, but by tradition and memory, attributed to the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus. He gave them order, equality among citizens, and a rigid structure that turned a small city-state into a powerhouse. They didn't build grand temples like Athens, nor did they pen epic poems. Their legacy was carved into muscle and bone. Women in Sparta lived longer, married later, and had more rights than in any other Greek city-state. They could own land, divorce freely, and raise their children with pride. In a strange way, while men were away fighting, it was the women who upheld the Spartan ideal. They were the moral backbone, unyielding, proud, fierce. Their daughters were no less determined. And when the boys returned, if they returned, the women met them not with tears, but with expectation. Have you brought honor to your name? Sparta stood for centuries, defying larger empires and internal decay. Even mighty Athens bent beneath the Spartan spear in the Peloponnesian War. But in time, even Sparta's steel would rust. The population dwindled. The rigid system, once a strength, became a cage. Other Greek states evolved. Arts, science, philosophy flourished elsewhere. But Sparta held firm to the old ways until it could no longer sustain itself. When it fell, it did so quietly, without grand battles or dramatic sieges. The warrior state that once sent shivers through the ancient world faded into memory, but its legend endured. The word Spartan today still conjures discipline, resilience, and warrior spirit. It speaks of a place where comfort was weakness, fear was forbidden, and life was a constant test of worth. To grow up in ancient Sparta was not merely to live. It was to be molded, hammered, and sharpened into a living blade. It was a childhood without softness, a youth without rest, and a manhood without choice. But it created something rare and terrifying. A society that turned its sons into soldiers and its daughters into defenders of its soul. In the end, to be Spartan was to belong to something greater than the self. Something carved into history, not with ink, but with blood, bronze, and fire.